The date is May 7th, 1824 in Vienna. Beethoven is facing the orchestra on stage as they play his Ninth Symphony for the first time in public. In response to this most marvellous work, the audience erupts into a thunderous applause. Yet Beethoven is completely unaware and continues to have his back to the audience. It is only after he is alerted to this reality and physically turned around by one of the soloists on stage that he sees the audience's emotional outpour of appreciation for his music. Upon viewing the spectacle, he begins to weep. By now completely deaf, the only man in the room who failed to hear the magnificence of the music played that night was its composer. Robbed of the physical ability which his arts depended on, this virtuoso pianist and one of the greatest composers to have ever lived considered ending it all. Yet as this letter will show, in the darkness of his realization, he was saved by his passion. Doomed to a physical fate only to be found in the nightmares of musicians, an already socially isolated Beethoven ostracized himself further from society. On the advice of his physician, he moves to the town of Heiligenstadt for some countryside air, his last hope, and it is here where he pens this most powerful letter. First, addressing those who consider him ill-mannered for his isolation, Beethoven writes, "O you who think or say that I am malevolent, stubborn, or misanthropic, how greatly do you wrong me. You do not know the secret cause which makes me seem that way to you. From my childhood on, my heart and soul have been full of the tender feeling of goodwill, and I was even inclined to accomplish great things. But think that for 6 years now I've been hopelessly afflicted, made worse by senseless physicians, from year to year deceived with hopes of improvement, finally compelled to face the prospect of a lasting malady." Then, in words that must have pained him to write, like no others, he describes the frustration of being unable to socialize with others. Though born with a fiery, active temperament, even susceptible to the diversions of society, I was soon compelled to isolate myself, to live life alone. If I at any time resolved to surmount all this, oh how cruelly was I again repelled by the experience, sadder than ever, of my defective hearing. And yet I found it impossible to say to others, "Speak louder, shout, for I am deaf." Alas, how could I proclaim the deficiency of a sense which ought to have been more perfect with me than with other men, a sense which I once possessed in the highest perfection? Forgive me, therefore, when you see me withdraw from you, with whom I would so gladly mingle. Completely isolated, I only enter society when compelled to do so. I must live like one in exile. In company, I am assailed by the most painful apprehensions, from the dread of being exposed to the risk of my condition being observed. Expressing the hurt of not hearing where others hear clearly, Beethoven articulates the only thing which saved him from the brink of suicide. What humiliation when anyone beside me heard a flute in the far distance while I heard nothing, or when others heard a shepherd singing, and I still heard nothing. Such things brought me to the verge of desperation and almost caused me to put an end to my life. Art alone deterred me. It seemed unthinkable for me to leave the world before bringing forth all that I felt called upon to produce, and thus I spared this miserable life. God looks into my heart, he searches it, and knows that love for mankind and the desire to do good have their abode there. With one end in his mouth and the other on the soundboard, after this letter, Beethoven would use a pencil to feel the vibrations of the notes on his piano and compose some of the most timeless pieces of music the world had seen and perhaps would ever see. Defiantly dedicated to his craft, stubborn in his towering standards, and in a hurry to express all that was in his heart. For Beethoven, there was no time for pleasantries and no happiness to be found except in his music. And it is clear why. Beethoven saw himself as a servant of humanity, with his gift, music, that could move people no matter their background or their place in history. Out of love for his fellow man, Beethoven cared more for his art than for his life. Beethoven, with a letter for the ages.